So I don't think it's controversial to say that Jesus was probably one of the most important historical figures to ever exist. He made such an impact that we are still talking about him today, nearly 2,000 years later. But who exactly the historical Jesus was is a subject of great debate, and the answer generally depends on who you're talking to. Today we're going to talk about that. Hey, I'm Bailey.
I'm Michael.
And I'm David.
And welcome to Facing the Gates podcast. Welcome to a new series of episodes where we are evaluating Christianity, or as I like to call it, the Christianity for Skeptics course. And what better place to start than the central figure of Christianity himself, Jesus.
A very controversial figure.
Yeah.
To a lot of people.
Yeah. So, going into the series, my goal is by the end of this series of episodes, both of you should have all that you need on an intellectual basis to become Christian if you want to. You'll also probably know more than the average Christian, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. And something I probably should have asked last episode on the Reflections on God episode, but I'll ask here instead. If you were to quantify the probability of God existing from 1 to 100, 1 being definitely not, or 0 to 100, 0 being definitely not, 0 chance, 100 being, of course, 100% chance, where would both of you guys put that at?
Are we talking about the Judeo-Christian God or just God as an idea? As a universal being?
God as a person, like a personal God. You can quantify that however you want, but I wouldn't say God as as the universe necessarily, like God as a personal force.
Yeah,
personal being.
I meant more as like a thing.
Yeah.
It's hard to say thing or person because it's kind of greater. The idea is greater than that, but I get what everyone gets what we're saying.
So where would you place that on like a 0 to 100% chance or confidence? Where
I'll go with 95% because there's still times where I question. Mm-hmm. There's still times where I wouldn't put it at 100% either. Yeah,
I would probably put it around like 90 to 95.
I mean, there's always that air of doubt.
Yeah, there's always going to be room for doubt.
Yeah,
but so, I'm like you. I'm fairly confident that
there is something greater.
Yeah,
and we just happen to call the fella God.
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable at 95%.
What about you, David?
See, this is
I know
it's tricky for me because I'm not going to. In my mind, there's always that possibility,
right?
But to quantify it in a 0 to 100,
just give an emotional answer.
I'll say probably like a 7. Like it's possible.
7%.
7 out of 100.
That's more than I thought he would.
Okay.
I was thinking 5 for him.
Well, I don't know. As soon as you said, I'm like 7.
That's a really specific number.
Yeah, I don't know why, but it's just what I'm thinking because it's a possibility, but to me, it's not say 50-50 either.
Yeah. Whereas for me, God gets an A+, 95.
Okay. That's interesting. At least you're not like one of those atheists that are like 0% chance. Impossible.
The big thing for me is I know I can be wrong. I'm human.
Yeah, I want to fight those people.
Yeah.
Like if you were at 0 or 100%, either you experienced God or
you experienced the void of nothing.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
I mean, like, I don't think there's any way to be, I mean, unless you have had like a near-death experience or something, you're absolutely positive.
Like
there's no way that you can be 100 or 0%.
Like having heart surgery, heart ripped out.
See, I think a lot of the issue asking certain atheists that question is they'll think of a specific God, the Judeo-Christian God. My mind went blank. They'll think of a specific religion's God.
Right, yeah.
Because instead of God as an idealistic entity, they'll think of, Jesus God.
Or,
Muhammad God.
Yeah. I also see it as kind of a defense.
Muhammad wasn't God.
You ask a Christian.
Was a prophet, but
I said Jesus God, sir.
Like,
Jesus is God.
If you ask a Christian,
You know what I mean. He was also a prophet.
Yeah, well, if you're talking to a Muslim.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
But I also
people get what I mean.
see it on like the 0 and 100 as a defense mechanism, because if I ask a random person on the street that's around here definitely is Christian, they'll be like, oh yeah, 100%. Or if I go to, say, a punk show with a bunch of anarchists or whatever, and I ask them if there is a God, a lot of them would say 0. Or if I talk to an anti-deist, they're like, no, I'm not even going to answer. I'm not even going to give you an answer because God's bad.
I think that's like the most asshole answer.
Yeah,
like
it's a natural defense in a lot of the cases, but since we're comfortable with having that conversation together, we can give a more kind of nuanced answer.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just wanted to have that as set for like a threshold, I guess, for the beginning of the series.
Watch David go to 100 real quick.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. We'll see how these percentages change over time, or if they change, or if they go down. Maybe I'll do a bad job at convincing you. But as I mentioned in the Reflections on God episode, much of what we're going to be discussing going forward will be easier to digest and agree with if you believe that God exists, or at least concede that it is possible that God exists. So, I mean, obviously, me and Michael will agree on this, but David, for the sake of the conversations, which I'm sure you will understand, let's assume God exists for these conversations.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Take that 7% and make it a 97%.
Yeah, and I mean,
this moment.
And I think most people being honest with themselves can agree, like, there's at least a possibility.
Yeah.
They're just not being honest.
Yeah, just like there's a possibility of not.
Yeah.
Everyone just needs to be honest.
Yeah, and this one's going to be a tougher question for you. Probably, maybe, I don't know. As a related question, and this is not a trick question, I want you to be 100% honest with me. On a scale of 1 to 100, how convinced are you that Christianity is true?
That is... I'll let David go first, because I'm thinking...
I mean, from the historical aspect, not the like spiritual aspect, it's, I'd say right now like a 75. Like there's a lot of good documentation on it.
Mm-hmm.
But as with all history, some has been lost due to time.
Right.
And so, and also the kind of ways like history is written by the victors and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I need a little bit more of what you mean by the
elaborate. Well, essentially, okay, so like you would agree that out of all the world religions, it's impossible for all of them to be correct.
It's 99%.
Okay, so essentially there would have to be one of them that is the truest form, essentially. So that's what I mean, that when I say Christianity is true, that means to its core, Christianity is true and the other religions are false, or at least mostly false.
Taking out my biases, obviously I was raised in the South, raised around a lot of Christian people, raised that's the way you think. Mm-hmm. Taking away that bias, I'd go, this may sound very, very weird, I'm going to say about 50 to 60%.
Okay, cool.
And is that both from a historical and like say a spiritual value, or
I was interested that you made that distinction.
Yeah,
because I'm curious, why would you make that distinction?
Because like the history of Christianity, as I said, it's well documented.
Romans are really good at documentation.
Yeah, but it's just me being a filthy atheist and not believing in a God. That makes it spiritual.
That does make sense. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like here's documentation that Jesus was a person.
Yeah, where I lean more spiritually, because history is written by victors, by the people who write it. So, obviously, there's always that possibility. But spiritually, that weighs heavier into my scale than would definitely David's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's the way I was raised.
So your 50 to 60% is more based spiritually than historically.
Yeah, because I know the history to a point.
Mm-hmm.
I know
we'll be talking about
the
it more in
writers
these
of
episodes.
history.
Yeah.
Romans show up a ton. Romans, Greeks, Europe are based on a lot of the history that we are fed as Americans.
Right. All right, cool. All right, well, it sounds like I've been asking a lot of questions, and most of this episode I'm going to be presenting information, and most of these episodes as a series I'll be presenting you information. But for one last question, I wanted to ask you, what are your preconceived notions of Jesus? What have you heard about Jesus, and what do you believe about him?
He was a man of the people. Not necessarily like, like how we think of it today, but more of he was willing to teach his message, spread it to people. From my point of view, seemed a very loving individual, very open, and a lot of the things that we idealistically want to be.
Yeah.
And I don't believe any man's perfect, but being raised how I was raised, it was like, Jesus is the one.
Jesus is the one. All right.
We're not going to continue with more of that because we will get canceled.
Yeah, if you guys know that song, you're an OG.
But yeah, I mean, kind of like what we all strive to be. Gotcha. Essentially, we want to be good people. We want to love our fellow man. We want to try to teach them.
Here's the blueprint.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Here's what you want to be, but he is.
Yeah.
Here's the other guy that's talking to your girl. Except Jesus wouldn't do that. He'd tell you like a man.
All right. What about you, David?
Pretty much the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Because, it was documented he preached to anybody. We actually had a good conversation earlier kind of about this stuff. So, basically taking the political aspect aside that we put into it now.
Yeah.
Pretty much, Jesus was a pretty good dude. I don't know if he was 100% perfect, but based on what you believe, yeah, he pretty much was just as perfect as he could be. But gotcha. At least he was like one of the best people you could ever meet.
Yeah.
If not the best person that has lived.
Bro, I'd hang out with Jesus.
Yeah.
So we got high views of Jesus, even the atheist.
Yeah,
you don't have to believe in a religion and think someone's a pretty nice person.
Heck, yeah. Jewish people don't believe that Jesus was the
Messiah, but they think he was.
But they think he was a pretty good prophet.
Not at the time.
Well,
obviously not.
Yeah, not at the time, but nowadays it's viewed like, yeah, he was a pretty good dude.
I would say the Romans might have thought a little less of him.
Oh, definitely.
Well, it probably also depends on who you talk to, because some of them are like, yeah, that guy kind of led us astray for a little bit.
The guy who shoved a spear through his body really thought less of him.
Yeah, I think so too.
But he still forgave him.
Because he's a good dude.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like I mentioned in the intro, who Jesus is to you depends on who you are. He's the hero of the story for Christians, a false prophet to Jews, a mythical character to the ignorant, and a good moral teacher to atheists. So that being said, I understand my Christian bias here, and I want to take a little bit more of an objective approach when answering this question of who Jesus was. So for this episode, I will not be appealing to the Bible, except in passing. Instead, what I'm going to do is outline some external historical attestations about Jesus so we can get a better idea of who he really was. Before we get into that, though, I want to say, and not that you guys are those people, but there are some people out there, some Jesus mythicists. Jesus was not a myth. He was a real being. He really existed. We can debate about a number of things about Jesus, and that are worth debating, but his existence, unfortunately, is not one of those things. Anyone who makes this claim is simply ignorant of historical fact, because we don't only have to appeal to the Bible to prove that he existed. Several external sources around the time mention Jesus, such as Josephus, Tacitus, Lucian, the Babylonian Talmud, Suetonius, Pliny, Marabar Serapion, and Thallus. So we have good reason to believe that he existed. The New Testament coheres well with what we know about history during this time period. It agrees with other historical sources, what they claim around the time, such as rulers, empires, customs, etc. I'll be giving a case for the reliability of the New Testament in a future episode, though. But claiming that Jesus never existed causes major historical problems when it comes to explaining the resurrection, as well as the rise of Christianity, which we'll also discuss in future episodes. And lastly, we don't apply this conspiracy theory logic to other historical figures, such as George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, so don't selectively apply it to someone you disagree with. And my sources are in the description if you want to fact check me. All right, you guys can have your thoughts on that. I'm going to drink something.
Pretty good. I would have put more so like a, for example, like Plato or someone that's like also documented to have existed hundreds of years before, because like say George Washington and whatnot, it's kind of recent for historical viewings. So, but yeah, I mean, pretty much it's documented. Monks.
I just see a lot of people, like, especially on like Twitter and stuff, that like, oh, well, Jesus was just made up. Well, obviously you're ignorant because you haven't looked into actual history.
I mean, there's also people who deny the Holocaust, deny school shootings. People are going to deny what they don't want to believe. I mean, what fits their political or religious views.
Yeah.
They're going to try
it's
to
a really easy dodge for any of the questions of Christianity, is just say, oh, well, he didn't exist.
Whereas you can be a normal person like, yeah, he existed, but that doesn't... Look at the Jews, so like, yeah, that's not my prophet.
Yeah. We'll get into this more later about how it really causes problems, especially with the resurrection. The claims that are made around that. If you claim that Jesus just didn't exist, it doesn't explain that stuff. My
biggest thing is you don't have to believe...
You don't have to agree with him. Don't say he didn't exist.
Yeah, you don't have to believe like rose again after 3 days. You don't have to believe that. You don't have to believe he was the Son of God. But
yeah, because I mean,
he was a person, no matter what. Yeah. Jesus of Nazareth. All right.
Unless you can choose to not believe he's wrote if you don't believe any record keeping since humankind has started record keeping.
Yeah, be consistent with your logic.
Yeah.
All right.
Sky is blue, sun is bright, fire burn.
We love writing history down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite subjects.
All right, so let's get into the external historical sources. Attestation number 1 is that Jesus was a good moral teacher. Josephus says, quote, "At this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous," end quote. And this is quoted in the book of Title. For reference, Josephus was a Jewish priest, scholar, and historian. He is one of the leading sources of history during this time period, so I'll be referencing him more. But obviously Josephus said that, and the Marabar Serapion refers to Jesus as, quote, wise king, end quote. And that is a letter written by a Roman Stoic philosopher by the name of Serapion. So those are two things saying that he was a good moral teacher, which, I mean, we all agree with anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, even as someone who isn't a Christian, like, I can look at the blueprint and be like, yeah, this dude is pretty fucking nice. Part of my French therapy, but It's a good fucking dude. And so if someone asks me what would Jesus do, I'm not going to be like, oh, well,
I don't
actually. No, I'm like,
I'm not Jesus.
he'd
You
help.
make a good guess, though.
He would help
Probably.
them.
Yeah.
Like, he wouldn't be a dick. What would Jesus do? Be a good person. Do what is morally right. Even if it might not be the easiest thing. It's like, see, if you see someone with a wrecked car and no one's there, you stop and you go, hey, are you okay? It's inconveniencing you, yeah. But you're morally doing the right thing.
David, do you have any comments on those attestations? Or
I
that
mean,
one?
Michael pretty well said it.
Yeah.
Well, he said it pretty well.
All right. Well, the second attestation is that Jesus performed miracles. Believe it or not, there is external attestation to that. The Babylonian Talmud claims that Jesus, quote, practiced sorcery, end quote. And this is in Sanhedrin 43a. We'll actually be coming to this quote in a little bit more detail later. So the Babylonian Talmud is a Jewish text that is the source of religious law and theology. It generally holds a very anti-Christian bias, but happens to say something very useful about Jesus here. So this is the way outsiders at the time portrayed Jesus. They explained his miracles being performed as sorcery, which is actually still parsimonious with the biblical conclusion that Jesus had supernatural powers. And I can't downplay the importance of this because there is external attestation that Jesus actually did the things that were claimed in the New Testament. From his enemies' perspective, they're saying this. There's a lot of people that I know nowadays, especially, that will say, yeah, sure, Jesus existed, but he probably didn't perform miracles or raise from the dead. That's not what other people thought. And those other people were against him. So I think that's a pretty important attestation to note. I'll let you talk now.
Witches and Wiccans also performed sorcery.
Yeah.
So
Salem witch trials. All of them people perform sorcery, black magic, or something of the sorts.
Yeah.
Is what is put forth in legal document.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they did it.
Well, I'm not saying
I
that
know.
proves that Jesus was good. But if we look at the previous attestation, it is Jesus was a good moral teacher.
But-
attestation number 2, he performed miracles.
yeah, to me, I don't necessarily think miracles have to be like supernatural. Now,
If you multiply bread, I think that's a little bit of a supernatural power.
yeah, well,
Or raise someone from the dead.
A
That's
lot of
kinda
people
supernatural.
hold up. Historically, a lot of people have been raised from the dead.
yeah,
They used to put bells in coffins for you to ring if you arise from the dead and reincarnate. So that one leaves a little leeway in my book
yeah,
due to the fact that they used to just leave bodies sitting to make sure it wouldn't wake up because we really weren't doctors back then.
All right.
I mean,
I don't, and this is probably bad of me, but I don't know the specifics of how Lazarus died. So I can't say whether or not they knew he was dead. But Jesus, they knew that guy was dead. They impaled him with a spear.
I remember that from Bible study.
So,
I remember the graphic detail our Awana's teacher went in.
yeah.
yeah, pretty graphic.
Kind of
Yeah.
fucked me up a little bit. It's like, they what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Roar him?
We're going to talk more, obviously, about that in the resurrection and, like, whether or not he rose from the dead. Because, I mean, if Christianity is true, that has to be true. If that didn't happen, Christianity is not true. The end.
Yeah.
So,
And
we'll come back to that later.
I think a lot of like the rising from the dead thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be skeptic there due to history and due to some, how do I want to put this, negative biases put forth by other mentionings of Christianity by some history makers because it can be spun a million different ways.
I have a good case.
Yeah.
I think I have a good case
and
for
like
the
for-
resurrection.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you're
And
not.
it's also not my case, by the way. When we get there, I'm going to credit someone else because I kind of stole
and I
someone
mean,
else's
and
work.
like in my eyes, like for example, the bread thing, because I mean, we all know that person that can just like somehow get everything you need, the kind of get it guy, the go-to guy, and it's like, oh yeah, Jesus was very resourceful in my eyes, and because I mean, some parts of written history and Bible play. And as like with the witchcraft and stuff, it could just be playing upon it to affirm one bias or another.
Well, the Babylonian Talmud obviously has a very anti-Christian bias.
Yeah.
They're very Jewish at the time.
So it would be personally better if it was like someone directly male and not super against them because like sorcery and whatnot. Instead of like, oh yeah, this is how it happened. It's like, oh, it's sorcery.
Well, and we'll probably talk more about this later, but Josephus is more kind of middle of the road, I guess. He's not against Christianity, but he's documenting it in a more non-biased way. But I guess we'll go ahead and move on to the third attestation, and then we'll probably talk more. The third one is that Jesus was crucified by Pilate. There was a great fire in Rome during 64 AD, and many blamed Emperor Nero for it. Tacitus says that, quote, to suppress the rumor, he falsely charged with the guilt and punished with the most exquisite tortures the persons commonly called Christians, who were hated for their enormities. Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea in the reign of Tiberius, end quote. This is in Annals 1544. Tacitus was a Roman orator, public official, and historian. He's also one of the big-name historians during this time period. Josephus states that, quote, Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, end quote. This is also quoted in the Book of Title as before. And in the Babylonian Talmud, this is the same quote from before. This is the extended version. It says, in quote, on the eve of Passover, they hanged Yeshu. Yeshu is Hebrew for Jesus. It's how the Jews referred to him. And an announcer went out in front of him for 40 days saying, he is going to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and enticed and led Israel astray. Anyone who knows anything in his favor, let him come and plead in his behalf. But not having found anything in his favor, they hanged him on the eve of Passover, end quote. And this is from Sanhedrin 43a. So Jesus being crucified is one of the most historically attested facts during this time period. It's hard to argue that Jesus wasn't crucified when so many different sources, both Christian and non-Christian, all agree and say that he was.
Yeah, I mean, one thing historians love is documenting
Murder.
people dying.
Or
And in like
attempted
the
murder.
sense of like an outsider, it's very much like he was a scapegoat for something going on.
And you know what history loves even more than murder?
What's that?
Failed murders. People getting railroad spikes shot through their head and surviving. People going through the electric chair and surviving. One dude surviving 2 nuclear bombs.
Oh yeah, that was like
We
the
love
most-
documenting
most
the attempted murder.
Yeah, the most unlucky guy in Japan at that time.
Or Rasputin and them trying to kill him and sucking at it so bad for several hours. History's full of attempted murder.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious historical fact that Jesus was crucified. You will still find certain people that deny that, whether they are Jesus mythicists or
deniers.
I'm gonna hold my tongue.
Crucifixion deniers. Just
We'll talk about it more in a future episode because I have a whole spiel about it. Really,
I have a spiel to talk about after this episode.
All right. You might know what I'm alluding to.
Due to what you said about Jesus being persecuted.
Okay.
Ties back to the little thing we talked about before this.
All right, cool. All right, well, anyway, the fourth and final attestation is that Jesus rose from the dead. Josephus claims that Jesus' followers, quote, reported that he had appeared to them after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders, end quote. This is quoted in the book of Title. Now, I know this is not exactly proof that Jesus rose from the dead, but it is at least an attestation from an external source that verifies the claims of the New Testament. So, as I've mentioned before, Christianity rises or falls on the resurrection of Jesus, so we will talk about that in a future episode. And that is really all of the external attestations I have. What do you guys think? That was kind of short, but
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing where I'm still knowing history skeptical is, I'm not going to say he did or didn't rise from the dead, because that's the one thing I'm still, because he may appear dead, as many people have before. Human body is pretty fucking remarkable sometimes and pretty weak other times.
I can think of a million responses because I've just basically written out all the episodes for this series.
But
So I'm going to hold my tongue and wait until we talk about the resurrection, because there's a really strong case for the resurrection, but we'll talk about it when we get there. I'm going to just hold that for that episode so we don't get on a rabbit trail on that.
Yeah.
a man survived a several foot, very heavy railroad spike impaling through his fucking brain.
Or like people falling
He had
from...
the hole through his head still and was conscious. You can stick your finger and touch the pink matter.
I could... there's so much I could say, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch.
I mean,
I'm gonna put.
It's okay.
Don't push me, cause I am close to the edge.
I mean, we'll talk about it in a later episode.
Yeah.
But like the
Skeptic-
main, and like for me, that's like he's documenting what another source says. So it's not
Yeah.
a primary source.
Well, it's not him-
secondary.
Yeah, true. Right. He's just in that, like I said, it doesn't
He's
prove...
acknowledging that this is what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's acknowledging that they didn't... It's not a conspiracy. This is what they said.
Yeah. This is
not something that came later.
this is what
This
they
is what they
witnessed.
actually said, because he
Yeah.
was around that time, and so were they. And so I mean, like, that just adds credibility. And again, these are not really knockout, boom, Christianity's true. This is laying the groundwork for stuff that we're going to talk about later.
And this is mainly like Jesus existed.
Yeah, and also just, that's the main thing.
I mean, and there's like, for example, like the miracle thing for me is still like, I see that more like him being super resourceful to make sure people are taken care of.
Or people trying to paint miracle or sorcery as a negative connotation.
well, that's
due
what
to
they were
biases.
doing.
Yeah, negative
So-
or positive.
If it's coming from the New Testament, Jesus performed miracles. If it's coming from the Babylonian Talmud,
It's sorcery.
He's doing
It's
sorcery.
witchcraft.
Yeah.
So it's still describing the same
Yeah,
action.
same action, but
One just has a negative
different
connotation,
viewpoint.
one has a positive connotation.
One was like, I don't like this Jesus fella fucking up my religions.
Exactly.
I just learned this one. Damn it.
honestly, sorcery sounds cooler.
Yeah, it does.
Sorcery?
He's a wizard, Harry. You're a wizard, Harry.
Yeah, so obviously many of these sources have their own biases and perceptions about Jesus. Let me be clear for people at home. I'm not claiming that these external sources are simply mirroring the New Testament, nor that they were actually pseudo-Christians. Many of them were quite the opposite. But even if the external sources aren't Christian, they verify the claims about Jesus made in the New Testament, which, taken as a whole, do and can seem to point to his divinity. So before we wrap up,
Yeah,
what
basically
are your final thoughts?
Real quick, basically, they're not the hero be all end all, but they relate, and it's like, oh, this person said it, this person said it, the Bible says it, this person said it.
It just adds more credibility to it.
Here's who was the ruler. Here's a whole bunch of historical shit that all lines together.
Yeah.
It also gives you like the time frame, because it's like we see BC, 80, whatnot, it gives us like, oh, well, we know this king was such and such time, so therefore he was right here.
Yeah. And it gives it credibility to, like I mentioned before, that like this actually happened around this time. These people existed around this time. This wasn't made up by someone else later.
Yeah, it's not a giant conspiracy.
Right.
Because good
right.
God, if this was a giant conspiracy, we'd have a lot more questions that need to be answered.
Yeah.
The government's lizard people. Birds aren't real.
I know he was going to make that voice.
Yeah. I should have been expecting it. All
But
right.
in the end,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I think we all agree Jesus is a very large historical figure. Whether or not we agree with everything, that fact right there is fact. He was a person.
Yeah.
Jesus of Nazareth was a person.
Yeah.
His divinity is what, we all will disagree on.
Right. So, as the ultimatum once proposed by C.S. Lewis goes, Jesus was either a liar, lunatic, or Lord. For Jesus to be a liar, he would have to be the greatest deceiver of all time, and yet still a moral being? That seems like a contradiction. For Jesus to be a lunatic, he would have to be a lunatic with supernatural powers. I think the only other alternative is the rational conclusion to make, but I will leave that decision up to you.
I would disagree with the liar thing. There's a lot of people out there that seem extremely nice in public. As a public figure, they seem like great people. You would never think anything negative about them. But then you hear the horror stories that they're just an asshole and a terrible person, and they hate their job, they hate being a public figure, and they think you're all morons for following them.
Yeah, but both internal and external sources say
Yeah.
that Jesus was a good guy.
Yeah, but good guys lie.
Yeah.
I mean, you've lied, he's lied, I've lied,
People lie
everyone
in
lies.
secret. People put a fake face on. Just because you're doing the moral action doesn't mean you're moral. You just know that's what you're supposed to do. And I'm not saying
So
he
you're-
wasn't a moral person.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there.
You guys are just going to be the ultimate devil's advocate, huh?
I mean, I got to give everyone their fair shot
Yeah.
because I look at everything. I'm the agnostic theist.
You almost said you're the atheist.
Yeah, I was about to say, welcome to the club.
He's about to
I mean,
say-
there's nothing at the end of it.
He comes out.
We make cookies every Tuesday.
Michael comes
Are
out
they
of the
peanut
closet
butter
as an atheist.
cookies?
We vary week by week.
I couldn't come out as atheist because I kind of believe in a higher power.
Yeah, that's
That's
kind of
like the rule breaker right there.
Yeah, that's like the only deal breaker about being an atheist. Like, I mean, I prefer you be a good human being too, but not everyone agrees on that one either, unfortunately.
That's like the duality of it all.
All right, well, we got any other thoughts on this episode before we wrap it up?
Don't be a dick.
Jesus existed.
He was a human. Yeah.
I know this is more aimed towards, like, proving that he existed, but, I mean, like,
Yeah,
we
so-
all started, like, yeah, he existed.
Humanly, in the human form, at the bare minimum,
Yeah.
he
But
was,
enough
he was
people-
here.
Yeah.
Everything else may be foggy, but like he's a documented being,
Yeah, when enough
He's not
people
an
talk
immigrant.
about you.
and he's not an illegal immigrant sneaking into the country undocumented.
All right.
He's not a ghost.
Yeah, when enough people talk about you, you kind of have to exist,
Yeah.
especially if they hate you,
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of willpower just to write hate stuff and write good stuff. But
This guy's so nice. Fuck this dude.
Essentially, that's what happened.
oh, he's doing sorcery.
All right. Well, I guess it's time to wrap this episode up. Follow our socials and get in contact. All that's in the description or show notes.
Speaking of which, I am still thinking of the answer to the nice person.
Oh yeah, that'll be like weeks old by the time this goes out. So
You might,
There'll be more.
yeah, you might.
I'm
have
just
answered
putting
it,
a
but-
blanket statement. Also, I think this is the latest episode we've recorded, so
No, it's not the latest.
apologies if any of us seem a little out of it. We've
Yeah.
all had long weeks,
yeah, it's fine.
but we get together and we love talking about religion.
Yeah. All right. Well, so next time we're going to be talking about the history of the Bible, basically how it was written, canonized, and translated, and all that good stuff. So yeah, we'll be talking about that next time.
Jesus is
Love you guys.
the
Goodbye.
one.